Imagine today is August 1st, 2007, and you are in Minneapolis, Minnesota. After a hectic day at work, imagine how relieved you are to finally be on your way home. Maybe you have plans for dinner with your spouse or plans to attend your child's sporting event. At 6 p.m., you drive onto Interstate 35 West at University Avenue, heading over the St. Anthony Falls Bridge. Little do you know, in an instant, your life and the lives of those in your community could change. At 1,907 feet long, the St. Anthony Falls Bridge opened in 1967 and carried an estimated 140,000 vehicles across the Mississippi River daily. The bridge was considered one of the three main routes into downtown Minneapolis area and one of the busiest bridges across the mighty Mississippi River. On August 1st, 2007, at 6:05 p.m., approximately 120 vehicles with 160 people were crossing that bridge on Interstate 35 West between University and Washington Avenues in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when the bridge suddenly collapsed into the Mississippi River. The bridge span broke into multiple planes and levels from the impact of the collapse. A total of 111 vehicles were on the main span of the bridge during the collapse, with 17 vehicles being plummeted nearly 108 feet into the 15-foot deep water below. The other vehicles sat dangerously close to the vulnerable edge of the bridge, including a school bus that was filled with 62 children returning from a field trip that landed close to a tractor-trailer that was in flames. In the end, estimates on the number of injured vary, but it is believed to be as many as 145 people. A total of 13 people were killed, and a community was left stunned. At 6:06 p.m., the Minneapolis Fire Department was dispatched to the scene and arrived at 6:11 p.m. By 6:18 p.m., just 13 minutes after the collapse, the battalion deputy chief assumed the role of incident command. First responders included police and sheriff's departments, fire, and emergency personnel. These responders faced multiple challenges, including victims in the river, adults and children trapped in vehicles and in rubble, vehicle fires, potential hazardous materials, multiple injuries and deaths, and they faced the risk of further collapse of the already crumbling bridge. Additionally, multiple witnesses and bystanders had crawled out onto the broken structure, attempting to help victims get out of their vehicles and off the bridge. A supervisor was assigned from the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office to coordinate water rescue and was at the site within 30 minutes of the initial 911 emergency call. Staging and safety officers were also appointed to aid in the coordination of water rescue missions. Coordination was essential as 5 area counties sent support staff. 12 agencies and 28 watercraft arrived within 1 hour to offer assistance with the search and rescue recovery mission. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the National Guard provided equipment such as boats, barges, lifts, and cranes to support the recovery operation. Within 5 hours of the collapse, the U.S. Coast Guard arrived with 2 boats and crew. U.S. Navy and commercial divers arrived to assist with underwater victim recovery. To ensure safety of the dive teams, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration provided hourly weather reports and updates to Incident Command. Upon arrival to the scene, it was unknown if the collapse was the result of a terrorist attack or related to an infrastructure failure. For that reason, explosive ordnance device teams, the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Minnesota Homeland Security, as well as the U.S. Secret Service responded. The health and safety of the public was the primary concern after the bridge collapse. Within minutes of notification, public health officials from the Metro County Health Department worked to oversee patient conditions, medical transportations with hospital capacity and availability. 3 hospitals implemented their disaster plans. Victims were transported to 11 area hospitals by an estimated 31 ambulances. Injuries mainly consisted of lacerations and crush injuries. While there were no residential communities on the banks of the collapse, there was significant student population located within blocks of the bridge. The health department coordinated with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization to begin monitoring air, water, soil, and debris for hazardous materials, including asbestos, potential oil, gas, and other fluid leaks from vehicles, and possible decomposition of unrecovered bodies in the river. While no hazards were identified, information on possible hazards was crucial for responders, cleanup personnel, and community members. Air, soil, and water quality monitoring would be continued during debris removal due to potential hazards from the dust created. The Occupational Health and Safety Administration and the Minnesota Office of Pipeline Safety responded to ensure pipelines in the river beneath the bridge were not affected by the impact of the collapse and weight of the debris. A family assistance center was established to provide multiple services and mental health aid to victims and families of victims. A media-free zone was created to ensure privacy for families during this time of crisis. The Hennepin Medical Examiner's Office coordinated with police department chaplains who were assigned to handle all death notifications. Mental health counselors were available to aid community, including those who were on the bridge and survived the collapse, as well as those who were witness to the collapse. Utilizing local and state resources, public health officials coordinated behavioral health and grief counseling services through the Medical Reserve Corps. The Minnesota Department of Health provided information on their website consisting of update events, volunteer opportunities, as well as provided information on mental health services available within the community. The Hennepin Medical Examiner's Office responded due to fatalities at the scene. The Medical Examiner's Office coordinated with the medical examiners from adjoining counties, particularly those downriver, for body recovery. It was determined that because it was possible for the bodies of victims to be discovered downstream, any bodies found in the river were considered victims of the bridge collapse and turned over to the Hennepin Medical Examiner's Office to ensure consistency in case handling and family notification.
When responders themselves were asked to assess their own performance, they said that the cooperation between the different agencies went really well and was the greatest strength of the response. They said that all the training they went through paid off and that the leadership did a great job with strategic planning. Further, both elected officials and employees of the different agencies went through FEMA's training together. This allowed everyone to practice responding to an assortment of terrible hypothetical disasters. It also allowed the responders to learn how their leaders will respond to certain problems. And another note about leadership, the mayors and the governor's offices agreed from the outset that they would speak with one voice. There would be no mixed messages from the government. This stands in stark contrast to how New Orleans and Louisiana responded to Katrina. Those are two of the successes. To start with some of the lessons learned, there was, in the beginning, police and fire departments each set up their own command centers. It wasn't until a little later in the process that they built a unified command center. Also, there was no safety officer on duty. Though for the most part, command showed proper regard for safety, there are a couple of incidents that a safety officer may have helped prevent. For one, the bridge wasn't evacuated in a timely enough manner, putting responders at greater risk. A few things that we learned about the use of EMS during a crisis. Nobody from EMS was posted in the command center during the response to the collapse. Further, there weren't enough EMS responders to fully enact a multi-casualty branch for the EMS. Many EMS responders responding to their doctor's wishes, used cell phones rather than the prescribed radios. This caused some miscommunication about how many patients were at how many hospitals, and things could have gone a little smoother, according to people in the command center after the response. Some of the public health responses mainly went along two avenues as far as successes go. The first was the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency repeatedly tested the river for pollutants during the immediate response to the collapse and then during the cleanup afterwards. No pollutants were found. Primarily concern was gasoline or diesel from cars that had spilled into the river. Also, there were several tractor trailers on the bridge, and there were some concerns that the plastic powder they were carrying might have spilled into the river, though there was no evidence of that, and everything turned up clean. The other avenue that public health responded through was mental health services. And the man in charge of the mental health response, Jonathan Bunt, had volunteered to go to Katrina 2 years before. And what he discovered was that they sent way more medical doctors than needed and way fewer social workers. And so in the response to the bridge collapse, social workers were on hand in much larger numbers. And one thing that he said about his time in Katrina was that disaster footprints have an impact that is significantly more psychological than medical or physical. And so they treated it in Minnesota more psychological than medical or physical. And next, we're going to look at preparedness. Preparedness of the people in the immediate area. Red Cross volunteers, dozens of volunteers arrived on the scene almost immediately. Before Red Cross could even send them out, they were showing up. Also, unaffiliated volunteers, people who were passing by or who were on the bridge and weren't injured, in moments began helping police and EMS responders and firefighters pull people to safety. Another form of preparedness was the training that the responders went through. There were three different trainings available. The first was from FEMA, the Integrated Emergency Management. Then there was the NIMS, National Incident Management System, and that is a Minnesota program. And then PERLC, Preparedness and Emergency Response Learning Center. And most of the people who responded had gone through multiple trainings, sometimes in different courses. And they had built up relationships during enrollment in these courses where they knew the people that they'd be responding with in case of an emergency. And resilience. By all accounts, Minnesota is a resilient city that has bounced back as close to normal as possible. Not one source that I could find could point to much as a sign of resilience. I think this is probably because resilience is invisible. The aftermath of a disaster in a town that is not as resilient would show signs pointing to the lag. Minneapolis appears, at least, to be back to normal. And pictured there is a sign of the memorial to the people who had died in the bridge collapse. That's not to say that people were not affected, though. Many survivors have shared their stories, and I'm sure that some people might have seen them either on the news or so forth in different anniversaries 5 or 7 years out. A couple that I want to share with you, though. Betsy Souther's husband had died in the collapse, and they had been planning to start a family immediately before that. After the earthquake in Haiti, she learned of 2 children who had lost their families in the disaster, much like she had. She adopted the 2 children, and all 3 are living happily in Minneapolis. Lindsay Waltz is a therapist who works with teens. In the aftermath of the collapse, she was frightened whenever she crossed a bridge, afraid that it would collapse. And she thought of the homeless teens that she worked with. Did any of them lose their home under that bridge? How many are now afraid to sleep under one of their former shelters, sometimes the only one available on nights? And as she worked on dealing with her fears, she used that to help the homeless teens face theirs. And then a few of the improvements that have been made in the aftermath. The University of Minnesota School of Public Health and the Minnesota Department of Health have created a new training course to help integrate public health workers into disaster responses. The program is called, this is a terrible name, Moving Beyond the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, HACEP. And what they are doing is we already have programs in place to make sure that firefighters and police officers work together in the case of an emergency. And this program is one that really tried to integrate public health workers into that process. Further was a new focus on infrastructure safety that included more frequent inspections and higher levels of funding. Unfortunately, some of that has tailed off in the recent couple of years, but not in Minnesota at least. This bridge is receiving a great deal of inspection and is up to code, probably due to increased people looking into it. The replacement bridge was built in 13 months since the accident. And so as you can see, the people of Minnesota, while they went through this terrible tragedy, were able to build this replacement bridge even bigger than the one before. And even though their lives were changed, they were able to take what had happened to them and incorporate it into their lives and into their futures. And this is all for our presentation. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed it.